everyone, and welcome to the first episode of In Session, Bennington to Montpelier, our new Legislative Roundtable program from CAT TV. I am your moderator and host, Jack Rossiter-Munley. I am coming to you from the Bennington County Multicultural Community Center, and I am so pleased to be joined today by Representatives Mike Nigro and Tim Corcoran, both representing our very own Bennington. This show is going to host a revolving door of legislators. It will include all of our representatives and senators at various points, and it will be coming out weekly during the legislative session this year, and we hope it will become an ongoing program from CAT TV and really enhance the connection that we have here in Bennington to our legislators and to the legislative work that goes on in Montpelier. So I want to start off by giving our very fine guests a chance to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about themselves. So we'll start with Representative Nigro. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, starting with the area that you represent, and then a little bit of your background and what has led you to this kind of public service.
Sure thing. So my name is Mike Nigro, and I represent Bennington District 5. I had for a moment hoped you were going to ask Representative Corcoran to go first, because then he would have described the district, and I would have said I'm everything else in Bennington. Because the district is a little bit of a jagged line that runs through downtown Bennington. So District 5 is everything east of North Street and south of Main Street. And in the most recent redistricting, we got a small portion of Pownell as well. So Barber Pond Road through South Stream Road is also part of District 5. So it is a little confusing, and the fact that it kind of runs through this jagged line through town means that nobody should ever be ashamed when they start a conversation by saying, I don't know if you're my rep or not. You're not alone. A lot of people are in that boat. It's perfectly reasonable. In terms of my background and my path to doing this work, I had worked for 20 years in healthcare, in 10 years in behavioral health, and then another 10 years in home healthcare. Most recently, I was the director of Beata Home Healthcare in Bennington, covering Southern Vermont's home healthcare services for that agency. And about 9 years ago, my wife and I also started a catering and concessions business. Kind of a weekend gig, something we did for fun. We literally started with a cart on Main Street selling maple cotton candy on Saturdays. And to our surprise, to some degree, that ended up growing to the point that a few years later, it got busy enough. I had to decide if I was going to focus on our business or the work I was doing in healthcare. And as much as I loved the work in healthcare, it was very exciting to be growing our own business. And we decided to go that way. So my full-time occupation for the past, I guess, 6 years now has been focused on our catering and concessions business. One of the things that did is it changed my work schedule quite a bit. We work a seasonal schedule. We work pretty much nonstop all summer, and we have the winter off. And that lined up with the legislative calendar for Vermont's legislature in a way that allowed me to start thinking about that, probably more than I would have been able to when I was still working in healthcare. And I don't think I had ever necessarily thought I was going to run for office. But I think this was something that had kind of crept up in my interest for a matter of years. And I think it was a combination of factors. One of those was simply the accessibility of our political system in Vermont. And I tell this to anybody, when somebody moves to Vermont, when I talk to people in Vermont, I say this all the time. We are so lucky, and we are in such a unique situation. We have this incredibly accessible political system. You can walk up into our state house any day of the week. You can walk and sit into a committee room. I used to joke before I ran that, I was on a first name basis with all of the legislators in Southern Vermont. And it wasn't because I was a big shot. It was because we're that kind of community. You run into each other in the grocery store. We see each other everywhere. So that's a really amazing thing and very different than a lot of the country. Um, I think it made it feel a little more realistic that was an opportunity. Um, while I was having some of those feelings, I also started to just generally start feeling discouraged about the state of politics in America. I have been, I've really struggled with the growing divisions, with the feeling that our system has continued to move further and further to the extreme. Um, and I've never related to that. I understand a lot of the things folks say on the extremes, but I've never related to it. I've always felt very much I can see both sides of many issues. I've always felt a little more center of the political spectrum. And I've always felt like there's other people like me, that I can't be the only one that feels that way. And I think when you start to feel these levels of frustration, you have to decide, are you going to complain about it or are you going to try to do something about it? And and so, that was, like I said, probably the biggest factor was just that feeling of frustration. And you start saying, what can I do? And I decided running for office was something I could do.
Fantastic. So same questions for you, Representative Corcoran. A little bit about the district that you represent and a little bit of your background. I guess not only what drew you to this, but what keeps you coming back.
Yeah, I represent District 2, and it's the opposite of what Mike represents. But no, basically I represent North Bennington and sort of like the outskirts of Bennington, sort of like the western end, Old Bennington. But for constituents to get a better feel, it's probably best to go on the Secretary website or even our legislative website. We have maps on there, and it can give you a feel for what's what. But yeah, I've been in the legislature for now. This is my 23rd year, and so going back 23 years, how did I get into it? Well, I was working at ChemFab in North Bennington, and I think probably people are well aware of that company that caused a lot of damage to our water system with a PFAS. They ended up closing, and I think that was in 2002. They closed, and that same year they closed, two of the current reps in my district were retiring, Jim Colvin and Dick Pembroke. So I was sort of like in between of, what should I do in the next chapter of in my life, and after consulting with my father, who was a former rep up in Montpelier for 16 years, it felt like it was a good path, to get her at that time a younger voice up in Montpelier to relay the concerns of the younger generation. So that's sort of what got me into politics, was just the timing of it all. There was two vacancies, and I was looking to do something else. So when I got into that, then it was sort of like I did it sort of backwards. I was like, all right, what am I going to sort of um, offset, the legislative session, the months that we're not in, working. So I got into real estate. So I currently work at Marhar McCarthy Real Estate, and I sell real estate in the months that we're up, not in Montpelier. So, that's, a little bit of the background. And, what brings me back is, it's just a lot of little things. I'm not the one to be out there in the forefront pounding my fist. I'm the one that is a type of person that works in the background and tries to break down the barriers and the red tape that are unfortunately are seems like they're embedded in our government for people to get things done. And I'm willing to, just help a constituent. My world is transportation. I served on that since I've been elected in Montpelier, and it's getting a lot more easier and easier with a lot, because basically everything you can do now, at a physical DMV location, you could do online. But in the past, a lot of people just had trouble getting their licenses or registration or renewals. And, I was always happy to help them out to do, to get them the paperwork that they needed. So yeah, that's sort of why I continue to do it. As just it's just sort of like the love. It's not for the money, that's for sure. We're definitely not getting rich off this. We're part-time legislators, and it's just trying to do what's right. There's a lot of issues out there that since I've been up there, that are very contentious, and going in, that no matter how you come down on an issue, you're going to have a certain portion or population that disagree with you, sometimes adamantly, and and but that going into it, that it's as long as you do what you feel that is right, and it's you think it's in the best interest of the people that you represent, then that's the sort of the foundation and model that I've always carried with me. And and anything that happens after that, politically or ramifications, so be it. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. I think I answered your question.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great intro to both of you. And you do both have sort of different paths in, but there is some connective tissue there of it being the right opportunity or the right time in your life to sort of enter politics. And it is interesting, and this is a topic I think we'll probably return to in future episodes of the show with yourselves and with other legislators, around the fact that fitting in work life around being a part-time legislator can be challenging, and it can also then influence who is actually able to think about running. And I know that's something that's come up a few times. But before we get into those kind of more specific conversations around different topics, I also want to give you both a chance to introduce the committee assignments that you both have, and also give a little primer for folks who may not be familiar on what the purview of those committees are. So I guess we'll stick with you, Representative Corcoran, since we started with Mike last week.
Sure. Sure. As I in the House, we are only assigned one committee assignment, as opposed to the Senate. They get two. They get a morning and an afternoon committee. We're just stuck in the committee all day. So I'm on the transportation committee, and it's obviously it's pretty much obvious, but our purview is paving the roads, the bridges, the airports, anything that's transportation related, public transit. We have a lot of grants for the towns, class 2 grant programs, town highway aid. So those are the things that we concentrate on. And then there's policy pieces within that. And but my committee is a little bit different, because we typically have two bills, and a lot of other committees have a lot more, but we typically deal with two bills in our committee. And they're our transportation bill, which is roughly, I think it's around $883 million this year. And a DMV bill, and that's a miscellaneous DMV bill, and that has to do with motor vehicles and all sorts of things on the other spectrum, as far as transportation goes. So that's sort of like a primer in a nutshell. And I guess I'll wait to when we'll have further dialogue about what our budget entails, and sort of the details of what our committee is currently working on. But that's sort of like the 10,000 view look of what our committee is in charge of.
And then, yeah, same for you, Representative Nigro. Tell us a little bit about your committee.
I'll leave it at that.
Review.
Sure.
Well,
So
I think you froze there a little bit. Did everybody, or was that just
I think we're good now.
Okay.
So I sit on the appropriations committee, which is actually, Tim mentioned it's a little different to that his committee only works on two bills. We are similar in that difference. Again, we're one of the unique committees. We focus pretty much the entire session on two bills. The first was one that we already worked on and got out of our committee because we have to do it rather quickly, although it's still in the legislature, hasn't gone to the governor yet. Still some work to do on it between us and the Senate. But the first is a budget adjustment, which I'll actually explain in a moment after I talk about the budget. And the second, the bigger of those bills we work on, is the state budget, and we spend the majority of our time. We've been working for the last 6 weeks on what is going to become a almost $9 billion budget for the state of Vermont. And it's a pretty big undertaking. In fact, some things are different about my committee that has taken a little getting used to. So just to give background, my first term I served in the legislature, I served on the Commerce and Economic Development Committee. Loved that committee. It was great work. But we were focused on all sorts of different topics and all sorts of different bills and different things that it just, very different sort of workflow as compared to appropriations. Day one, we start looking at the budget and we just focus on the budget nonstop. We actually work typically one extra day compared to the rest of the legislature. We work most Mondays when the rest of the legislature mostly works Tuesday through Friday. And the other thing that I'm still getting used to is we actually spend so much time, and it takes so much time to work on the budget that we really don't leave our committee room that often. So there are various things throughout the week, such as party caucuses and daily floor sessions, which is probably what people picture when they picture the legislature of all these people in a big room on the floor at their desks voting yes and no to various bills. Well, interestingly, my committee isn't present for an awful lot of that, just because the budget takes so much time. Now, don't get me wrong, important votes that we need to be there for, we appear for, but compared to other committees, we just are focused nonstop on this task, and to such a degree that my seatmate, so the person I sit next to in the chamber on the floor of the House, is a new legislator. And after a week or a couple weeks that I hadn't been to the floor because we've been so focused on the budget, I finally showed up for a vote. And she said, "Is everything okay? Have you been all right?" And I had to explain to her, this is normal. So if a constituent from Bennington happens to come to the State House and go and look at the floor and say, "Hey, where is Rep. Nigro?" odds are I'm in my committee room working on the budget.
Excellent. Those are really great introductions. And yeah, I would like to get into a little more detail on the work of the two committees. So in some capacity, basically everything comes before the Appropriations Committee just because almost everything is tied to funds. But let's start with the Transportation Committee a little bit and the actual work that's going on right now within that committee on the transportation questions.
Yeah, the transportation is, we're in a delicate situation is with our our funding. Our budget, I think, went up this year as opposed to last year by 0.2%. Which isn't that great. It really hasn't kept up with inflation. And then you add on the cost of the healthcare and fringe benefits and paying the employees within AOT. We're losing ground on keeping our infrastructure to where it needs to be. So we had the agency to, we asked them to do a analysis where we are with our funding in the out years, because we need X amount of money to match the federal dollars we get from Congress. And typically it's a 80-20 match, 80% federal and 20% state. Sometimes it could be 90-10 or 90-5-5, but for the most part it's 80-20 match. So if we don't have the state dollars, we're in the position of unfortunately not being able to expend those, and they could get taken back from us, from the federal government. Um, so just sort of give you a snapshot of what we're looking at for the year 2027, and then 2028. Those 2 years, we're going to be having a gap of $30 million. And then for the following year, for 2028, roughly $45 million. So that's, a huge gap that our committee is wrestling with. And then the next question is, well, how did we get to this gap? And, there's a lot of factors into it, but with fuel efficient cars, people going electric vehicles, which is great, but that means less revenue we're generating from the gas tax. And we're, I think, roughly off 50 million gallons of less fuel sold. And obviously that translates into dollars. Every penny on the gas tax raises around roughly, 2.9 million dollars. So it adds up quick when we're not getting that revenue, because the transportation, sort of backtrack, is we have three sources of revenue that make up our state dollars. We have the purchase and use tax. Your basically a sales tax on cars, your DMV fees, your registrations, your licenses, and then the gas tax. So like I said, our gas tax is going down, and our purchase and use tax, a third of that goes to the ed fund. So, and that's roughly, I have the number written down here, roughly $52 million that we're losing outside of that we are is taken right off the top from our transportation fund. So, and then there's another 20 million that's taken from us that goes to the general fund to fund the state police. So, we're looking at $72 million of revenue that's generated by the transportation fund, but we don't have access to it because we lost it. So getting back to your question, as a committee, we're really delving into how do we make up this gap. And the first step, the governor requested to retain that $20 million that goes towards the state police to keep that. So we would encourage Mike and his committee to go along with that recommendation. So to get that. And then the next step is, how do we sort of claw back the money from the purchase and use that goes in the ed fund? And that's a delicate situation, because obviously the less money the education fund has, it falls back on the property tax owner. So but I think the timing is good, because with our education reform that that we're going to be having over this year and the following couple years, hopefully there's savings in that, and then with those savings we can sort of claw back our purchase use money for the transportation fund. So that's sort of like the number one focus that our committee has been on. And there's other, not that we're considering this, to make clear, but there was a revenue analysis of alternative revenues that we could go after, and one of them was a delivery fee package. When you go on Amazon, go online, or wherever you get a package, we would put a fee on that, and that would generate around $10 million a year. We're not doing it, but eventually we're going to have to start thinking outside the box, because our traditional revenue sources just aren't keeping up with our needs on the roads and bridges and whatnot. So so that's the main focus of our committee this year, and sort of rambling here, but I should probably also mention that a lot of people were upset with the in January there was electric vehicle um, charge that was put on, and it was $84. And again, the rationale was for that is our declining revenues, and sometimes that's hard for people to understand. Is that the people that own electric vehicles, I think they have to contribute for that lost gas tax revenue. Um, so that was a regional for that, but that is going to be short lived because that is going to get replaced with miles based travel, MBUF, so user fee for how many miles you travel in the, in your car. And once we get the funding for that and to set up that program, um, it will work when you get your car inspected. The inspection station will, take a photo of your miles on your car, and then when you come back in the following year, they're going to jot down the number again, and we'll figure out a number to sort of compensate for the gas tax that one would have paid based on the miles traveled. And so those are, like I said, those are the mindset of our committees right now. My committee is the money. How do we keep the transportation infrastructure from crumbling? And that has to do with money. And there's another side note, is on the federal level, with President Trump freezing the federal funds, has had a direct effect on Vermont, and especially in transportation, and in potentially Bennington. um, we have roughly $40 million that was frozen, and the bulk of that money was going towards, or not the bulk of it, probably about 50-60% was going towards charging stations known as the NEVI program. And that money was frozen. So we can't take that money that we were going to invest and put EVs on the in locations that were for the traveling public, and Bennington was going to be a recipient of those funds, but unfortunately that is on hold. And there was also $1 million that was going towards the Ninja Path, that Bennington was rewarded. We had a federal grant for that, and I think that might be taken care of, but it might not. I'm still waiting to get an answer on that, but that potentially could have we might lose that $1 million because of the the freeze on the funds. So that is like I said, is what we're working on. And I have a lot more, but you can come back when there's more questions. I have a lot of notes here, but I'll just leave it at that.
I think that's an excellent overview, and thank you for making that connection between federal changes and the local level, because I think some of the first things you were talking about, where you're talking about this really significant imbalance where it's 20% state, 80% federal. I think when a lot of us hear that right now, our question is, well, where's that 80%?
Yeah.
How does it get here? And what will that mean for us? So I really appreciate that connection there. I think my follow-up for you, Representative Nigro, will be, a little bit of detail on that budget process that you go through as a committee. And then if you could also connect it to, how do you work with a committee like the Transportation Committee? How does that play into your budgeting process? And then what is sort of the focus of that budget process this year for all of you on appropriations?
Sure thing. So, I guess maybe I'd start with just a really simple comparison to our budgeting process, because there's no doubt a $9 billion or almost $9 billion budget is enormously complex. But to make a really simple comparison, I'd say if you were to sit down at the beginning of a year. Now, of course, most people think about a calendar year. The state's year is a fiscal year, so it's July 1st. But if you were to sit down, on a normal January 1st, the start of our year, and say, I'm going to make a budget for my coming year, and you're going to think about all the expenses you're going to have. You're going to think, well, I make this much money every year. This is my salary, and this is what I have to pay for my car payment. And you kind of lay it all out. So you say, I know I have enough to cover everything and maybe still go on vacation and save a little bit, for the future. So that's the budgeting process. That is where we make the plan. We project how much money is going to be coming in. We recognize you don't always know that exactly, but you project how much will come in, and you project what you're going to need to spend. You put some limits on it, not just project, but also say, we won't spend more than this on certain things. And that's the budgeting process. Now, as the year goes on, your car might break down and you have to fix, you have an expensive repair to your car, and you suddenly realize, geez, that budget's a little bit of a problem. The car broke down. So maybe you have to consider moving some of the funds. Maybe you don't take as long a vacation as you planned, and you're going to move some funds around mid-year. And then maybe shortly after that, you get a promotion, and all of a sudden you realize you have a little more money coming in. So maybe you're okay with that vacation after all. Well, that process midway through the year is the budget adjustment process. And that was the first thing we worked on when we got to the State House in appropriations, was the budget adjustment. So basically, the budget is a projection. It's a best guess with limits. The budget adjustment starts to become a reality. We say the first 6 months of the fiscal year started July 1st. The first 6 months of the year have happened, and we actually know how much we've spent, how much we need more money because we underestimated how much it was going to cost, how much we have extra money, we overestimated how much something was going to cost. And we also know revenues. So when we say revenues for the state, we're mostly talking taxes and fees. So income tax is, of course, the biggest, but, like Representative Corcoran said, DMV fees, when you get your license, all of those things, all of those are revenues. And again, we're guessing, things like sales tax, we can guess, but we don't know if people are going to buy more or less next Christmas. So the budget adjustment, we start to look at realities. Now, this year, we also do a projection for the second half of the budget year. So I say it starts in January 1st. So the second half starts it starts July 1st. Second half would start January 1st. So our state economists come in. We have one for the legislature, and the governor has an economist as well. The two of them come in and say, here's what we think the coming 6 months and the coming year are going to look like. So that's how we kind of build our projections. How much money do we have to spend? Well, here's what the economists think we're going to have to spend. And what we found is, the year we're in the middle of, the 25 budget year, has been good. The revenues were much higher than we expected. And when we got to the budget adjustment, it's kind of like that example in the household. Turns out we had gotten a raise. We had several $100 million more money than we anticipated. That's a good thing. That's always a good thing. It can go either way. Sometimes, it has happened in the state that we get to that budget adjustment, we realize we don't have anywhere near the money we thought we were going to have. We were to the good this time. And the projection of Vermont's economy right now is very strong. So both the economists, said that today unemployment is very low in Vermont. Consumers are spending, and the outlook is good. However, there's that asterisk that Tim mentioned, which is, there's a lot of question marks about the federal situation at this point. What's going to happen? Are there going to be these Canadian tariffs that would have a big impact on Vermont? We have a very intermeshed economy in Vermont with Canada. And is federal funding going to be slashed, and what federal funding is going to be slashed? Things like Medicaid, which I think is still kind of up in the air, what could potentially happen with Medicaid. We get an enormous amount of federal Medicaid dollars. So changes to that program would have ripple effects throughout the rest of our budget. So, that's essentially the process. We are working on building our best guess and projection and saying how much we can spend in certain categories for next year. And we are tidying up this year, saying this is the reality of what happened. And these are the changes we're making. And I'll just make a quick note, because I think Representative Corcoran brought up a couple really key things. First of all, I would just say that I think the work his committee does, that he does, is sometimes the overlooked important work in the state. Because the reality is, things like transportation, things like paving the roads, very rarely are big print headlines on the front pages of newspapers. But the reality is, these are the core functions of a state. I mean, these are some of the really important things that affect all of us on a daily basis. It's kind of like on a town level. I always say, what are the important things for, how do you measure a town doing well? How is their water system? How are the sidewalks? I mean, sidewalks might not be exciting, but I tell people all the time, I think Bennington does a great job on sidewalks. It's not an easy thing. And our town does a great job with it. And, I think those are some of the really important things. So like I said, transportation might not be front page news, but boy, is it important. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention is he brought up that state match. So just to clarify, there are a lot of times where the federal government says, we're going to give you money if you also contribute a certain amount. So every year I stand outside J.C. Penney and help fundraise an assistance fund that helps give out money for folks that are having trouble with their heating bills in Vermont. And the deal is, for any dollar somebody gives us, they throw in our bucket there outside. I said J.C. Penney, they're gone, right? I forever do that. So yeah, outside Ocean State job lot. For every dollar somebody throws in our bucket, Green Mountain Power gives us $1. They match it. And so, I always tell people when they're throwing a buck in, I always say, that's $2. You just donated $2, really. And that's the way it is with a lot of programs in the state, that for every dollar we spend up to a certain amount, we're going to get these federal dollars as well. But what that means is that in some ways, those are the most important things. Those are the things we really have to protect, because things like Medicaid, when we get so much federal funding, if we don't pay all of our portion, it's like we're just kind of like that donation becomes twice as much. We lose twice as much if we don't match. So that becomes, in our budgeting process, some of the things we really have to be careful to protect, because they're the most important things. We lose double the amount if we don't make our match.
That's a really excellent point. And again, that clarity about what the relationship is between the state and the federal is something that I think is just increasingly on all our minds, just because there is so much more uncertainty than there's almost ever been around where the federal support will come and how it will come. Sort of on that topic, I appreciate the details on the committee work. I'm also interested for your perspectives. We know the major challenges that face the state right now around affordable living and housing costs, the inflation in food prices at the grocery store, general cost of living challenges that people face, healthcare and education as well. But I'm curious for your perspectives as people who are in Montpelier, talking with your colleagues. What is the overall sort of vibe of this session as it's getting underway? What are you hearing people talk about? Where does the focus and energy, not even on any sort of partisan level, but just in general, what are the issues that people are saying my constituents are bringing to me, not only for yourselves here in Bennington, but on the state level? Is there a sense that you're getting about where people's sort of energy and thoughts are right now?
Let me I mean, yeah, I can go first. It's, I mean, I think it, I mean, it was self-evident, based on the November elections of where, Vermonters' minds went when they, elected, not a lot of new Republicans. And that's on affordability, So, we went into the session, um, you know, uh, focused on, affordability, property taxes, education reform, and our committees are currently working on those. The committees of jurisdictions are doing their due diligence. We'll have a cooperative spirit heading into this. All parties, it's not going to be political. Let's come to a compromise, and let's get to an end product that everybody can agree on. Sometimes things are easier said than done. And you start out in that path, and unfortunately, I don't think it's played out that way. Mike's committee did I think, a hell of a job on the budget adjustment, made the tough decisions, and basically gave the governor, oh, I don't know, probably 98% of the things that he wanted. And the only difference was as in the whole budget was roughly $1.9 million, and that was to house, the homeless, and I thought that was a key thing, the right thing to do. And unfortunately, that cooperative, let's work together, fell apart at the seams, and it came out on party lines. So you're starting to see that cooperation, starting to crumble, and I hope it doesn't totally fall apart, because we do need reform and education, and it's going to take both sides, to come together to come to an agreement. Seeing how the governor has, and I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but the governor does now have a much stronger voice than he has over the last 4 years. There's no supermajority. He has a veto-proof, um, body, both in the House and the Senate. He has enough members to sustain his veto. And like I said, that'd be a good thing. We need cooperation, and we need to come together. But so those are sort of like, that's the tone in my take up in Montpelier, is that people are trying to come together, trying to you know work in cooperative spirits, but or agreements, but it's starting to crumble a little bit in my take. And hopefully we can sort of get that back on the right path. One of the things that the governor cut out in his budget for the ed funding was the universal meals program. And I felt that was obviously quite unfortunate, and I think there's enough support, I think, actually on both sides. This goes back to being cooperative agreement. I think both sides of the aisle agree the importance of that program, and I think that will, Mike can speak to that, but I think it most likely will be put back in the budget. And we'll see how it plays out at the end of the day. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good assessment. I mean, I agree that compared to my other term, I definitely feel like we came into this term with legislators across the spectrum saying we've got to work together, we've got to work together. We agree on the issues, and some of the answers to some of the issues aren't even super political. So it's I think there's a belief that there's some stuff we should be able to do, but I also agree with the assessment that some of that could be starting to fray at the ends. One of the tough things is we are a citizen legislature. We're a part-time legislature. In a normal year, we have like a 19 or 20 weeks to go up there and do this work. And when we take on something as enormous as trying to entirely reshape our education system. That's really, really hard. And it's hard to do quickly, and it's hard to do without resources. I probably a lot of folks know this, but if you don't, you know, legislators, we don't have staff. We don't have, I mean, we forget about office. I don't have a locker anyplace in Montpelier. We don't have a lot of resources. And I get that. I don't think that's wrong. We're a small state. I think it would be silly for our legislature to be, making 200 grand like they do in New York and have huge staffs. I mean, it's a very different situation. I support the way we operate, but it makes big change very hard. And I feel like that pressure is definitely starting to build. And I am just hoping that we can get through some of our early disagreements, because they're going to come. We're going to have some disagreements on policy and on the path forward. And I'm hoping we can get through those without losing our sense that we're willing to work together. Because, to get to an end place, that's still what it's going to take.
Yeah. And I guess I'll also add, it's hard to do education reform without an actual bill. I mean, the governor still, maybe he did this last week, but we haven't had a bill to work off of. He has these concepts, and concepts to words on a paper are totally different. And I guess I'll also add is in the beginning of the session, we have dates in place that we need to have pieces of legislation voted out of committee. And so it can go over to the next body and they could have ample time to review and, make changes. And it's called the crossover. And our crossover for non-money committees is March 14th. In money committees, it's March 21st. So as Representative Nigro said, it's when you're talking about a huge overhaul of our education system, and we're just getting the details of this education reform, and this is supposed to be out, less than a month. It almost makes it impossible, but we're plugging away.
I think that's a really important note, both about the size and complexity of it, and then also the compressed timeline, because that does put a lot of pressure on the legislature to review quickly and to try and come to terms with something massive on a very condensed time scale as part-time legislators, even during the legislative session. It's not like you're there all day, every day. It's not like the rest of your lives stop. I think this is a really perfect segue into my last question for both of you in terms of that timeline for getting bills out of committee. What are some legislative goals for each of you for this session? And just quick 1 or 2 things that you're hoping to accomplish in this session, for either directly in your committee work with bills or just in general for the areas that you represent.
Just like I said, just in general, like I said, I honestly hope that we can get an education reform package. It's just our property taxes are out of control. It's something that we do need to rein in, because there's no end in sight as far as the increases are going. And there's going to be obviously tough decisions, and some people think they're going to come out on the better end of it, and some people are going to think they got the wrong end of the deal. But I think everybody agrees that something has to be done. So that's, like I said, that's my number one thing is setting Vermont on the right path to sort of control our property taxes to get them more reasonable. And that's number one. And and as far as my committee, really no priorities except for, like I said, making our transportation fund solvent in the fact that we don't lose federal dollars. Those are the 2 things that I hope we get done. And and like I said, you have the housing and all those things, but which are obviously integral to building our base, helping our property taxes. They're all sort of integrated. And But yeah, and you know, those are the two goals that I hopefully that will you know, we'll have a clearer picture on whether or not those are going to be reality, you know, within a couple of months. So
Yeah, I certainly agree that top priority is education and our property taxes. I think that's the focus for the year. There's no doubt. So you know, working towards a compromise there, I think is top priority. For me in my committee, if I could say what I've been really thinking more about is as we build the budget, I'm trying to think about how we can think longer term about our budgeting process. You know, there's a lot of times in the legislature that you know, each year we'll say, well, we can pay for whatever, we can pay for this year if we do this, and you say, well, what happens next year or the year after that? We'll figure it out. I think sometimes we set ourselves up for problems down the road. And of course, I'm one voice on the Appropriations Committee, so I don't want to pretend that I am you know, driving that bus. But at the same time, for my voice, I am trying to focus on not just, well, what will work this year, but what will be the right decision for the next, you know, 5-10 years.
Thank you both so much. Very quickly before we wrap up, I also want to make sure that you have a chance to let everyone watching know what the best way to reach you is and how to stay connected, even outside of the fact that we obviously will be happy to have you back on this show several more times during the session. That's absolutely our plan. But in general, what's the best way for constituents to reach you and to stay connected to your work?
yeah, I guess I'll just say, first of all, is I mentioned how they can continue to be informed is that, you know, is to go on YouTube. I mean, every single committee that we have, thing that we do publicly is televised. So just log on to Vermont Legislative webpage, go on to, you know, the committee that of your interest, and we have a YouTube link, and you could follow us 20 or not 24/7, but you know, the hours that we're up there. And you know, so that's a great way to be informed. And if they want to, you know, reach out to us, every legislator has his own email. And you know, for the people that want to reach out, which they do, feel free to contact me at T Corcoran, TCORCORAN at ledge.state.vt.us. And you know, and I don't have the number written down, but you can also leave us a voicemail with our Sergeant of Arms office. And you know, just call them up. You can leave me a message, and a page will come by and deliver the note, and I'll return your call.
Yeah, and you know, again, I'm happy if you can look if you look my name up, you'll find my legislative email online. But I also will give this one I find a little shorter and easier. You can reach out at nigro.vt, so nigro.vt@gmail.com. And either of those emails, either my legislative one or the one I just said, I'm happy to answer. And if you call the State House, I'll return a call as well.
Thank you both so much, and thank you both for being here this morning on the inaugural episode of In Session from Bennington to Montpelier. On future episodes, we will be joined by Representative Durfee, Representative Greer, Representative Cooper, Representative Morrissey, and Senators Bongartz and Plunkett. We will have a rotating cast of legislators who join each week. Thank you both so much for joining this morning. I really appreciate your insights, and I can't wait to continue this conversation throughout the session.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.